Imagine the excitement as you strap into your favorite amusement park ride. The adrenaline builds with each click of the track. But what if this ride turns into a nightmare you can't escape? This fear turned all too real when, in just 1 week, 5 people died in a series of roller coaster accidents. Families were left devastated. Investigations exposed glaring safety issues, and in the end, an entire industry had to change. This is how the darkest week for U.S. amusement parks played out. It's Friday, August 20th, 1999, and the Lake Compounce amusement park in Bristol, Connecticut is bustling. 16-year-old Matthew Henne is working at the Tornado, a whirling ride enclosed in a dark tent. As the ride is nearing the end of its cycle, Matthew crosses a yellow safety line and approaches the attraction. Moments later, he gets knocked over and becomes trapped under the ride. Firefighters rushed to the scene and had to use airbags to lift the massive rig. Matthew was airlifted to a hospital, but tragically passed away the next morning. Investigators found no malfunction in the ride. It was common for Matthew to enter the ride prematurely, but no safety violations were reported and he was never disciplined. While Bristol mourned, another accident unfolded just 2 days later. Tragedy struck at Paramount's Great America amusement park in Santa Clara, California. That afternoon, 12-year-old Joshua Smurphat eagerly got onto the drop zone ride, excited for the thrill ahead. The attraction promised an unforgettable experience. Riders would ascend to a height of 200 feet before plummeting in a 129-foot freefall. Just when it seemed the ground was rushing up too quickly, a magnetic braking system would engage, bringing the ride to a gradual stop. But this time, things did not go to plan. After a computer error, only 3 of the 5 tracks were operational. This meant that Joshua's mom, Tammy, couldn't accompany him like she usually would. As the ride descended, excitement quickly turned to horror when the 12-year-old slipped out of his harness from a height of about 50 feet. The frantic mother tried to run to him, but the gate blocked her. Joshua fell at over 60 miles per hour, striking the concrete base of the ride just 5 feet from where she stood. The impact was devastating and fatal. Investigators soon revealed a whole series of shortcomings that may have contributed to the accident. 2 years prior, a fire captain had noticed a gap between the seat and the harness, expressing concern that a small person might be able to slide through. His recommendation for a seatbelt-type attachment was dismissed. On the day of the accident, the ride was operated by a 14-year-old boy. There was also conflicting statements about whether a 16-year-old employee who strapped Joshua in had done so effectively. Despite these issues, police found no grounds for charges against Paramount's Great America. Their investigation concluded that the safety harness was in a locked position throughout the ride and that there was no evidence of mechanical failure or operator error. In response, the park installed a short restraint belt on every seat to connect the over-the-shoulder harness to the seat, preventing riders from sliding out. Despite these safety enhancements, tragedy struck again the following day at another Paramount park. A 20-year-old's life was cut short at Kings Dominion in Virginia while riding the Shockwave roller coaster. This 50-mile-per-hour stand-up coaster, manufactured by Togo Japan Incorporated, had been thrilling more than 13 million riders since opening in 1986. The ride began with a steep climb before taking a breathtaking 85-foot drop. That evening, Timothy Fan boarded the Shockwave along with his friend and other eager thrill-seekers. The 6-car train departed the station and began climbing the lift hill. Almost immediately, something seemed off about Timothy's behavior. Eyewitnesses saw him actively wiggling and struggling against the rigid shoulder restraint, managing to work one of his arms free into the open air. As the coaster crested the lift hill and hurtled down the initial plunge, Timothy's body had contorted into a sideways position. As the Shockwave neared the end of the ride, the train came off a straightaway, slowed down, and went into a 180-degree curve. That's when the forces acting on his unsecured body proved too powerful. In a terrifying scene, he was violently flung outward, torn from the speeding coaster train by the intense G-force. Timothy's body crashed 40 feet below onto the narrow catwalk beside the tracks. Though emergency responders rushed to the site, the head trauma he had sustained proved too severe, and he died at the scene. In the aftermath, the Shockwave coaster was immediately shut down as the sheriff's office launched an investigation into the harrowing incident. Park staff insisted Timothy's double restraint system of shoulder harness and waist bar had been locked in place when the coaster returned to the station, suggesting no mechanical failure. One of the eyewitnesses was Timothy's friend who was on the ride with him. He told officials that he watched his friend squeeze and wiggle his way out of the restraint. While there is no certainty why the 20-year-old tried to get out of the restraints, investigators believed that he was likely trying to raise his hands above his head moments before he was flung to his death. Ultimately, the finger of blame was pointed at the rider's failure to follow the proper safety instructions. 3 days after the incident, the ride reopened again. While Timothy's family insisted that a properly designed coaster should make it impossible for passengers to put themselves in harm's way, King's Dominion stood by its claim of rider misconduct after its investigation. The credibility of this claim was undermined when, shortly after, a teenage boy was able to intentionally slip out of the restraint, suffering minor injuries. In 4 days, there had now been 3 deadly roller coaster accidents. Just when it seemed the wave of tragedies might ebb, Six Flags Marine World in Vallejo became the next stage for disaster.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if they were letting us ride or what, but everyone was just screaming, and all the people at the bottom were running away like if someone was going to fall off.
The Boomerang Coast to Coaster is a ride that stands 125 feet tall, reaching speeds of 48 miles per hour. It starts off with passengers being pulled backward up a steep incline. Once at the peak, the cars are released, traveling forward through 3 corkscrew loops before stopping at the other end, and then reversing direction to repeat the loops backward. During one ride, witnesses reported hearing a loud cracking sound and seeing a long, thick black cable snap loose and whip around the tracks. Up on the coaster itself, panic hit as riders were fearing for their lives. The incident caused the train to stop between inversions, trapping some passengers turned upside down for 3.5 hours in 100-degree Fahrenheit weather. Fortunately, no one was injured. But before the end of the week, one more accident struck, and perhaps the most harrowing of them all. The Wild Wonder was the crown jewel of Gillian's Wonderland Pier in Ocean City, New Jersey. Manufactured by Zamperla, this state-of-the-art roller coaster had opened its doors just weeks earlier. The park had invested $1 million in the attraction, hoping to draw even more visitors to the seaside destination. The new coaster was a zigzag ride, where individual cars were pulled up a 40-foot incline. Once at the top, the cars were released to roll forward, propelled by gravity through curves and dips. That evening, Kimberly Bailey and her daughters, 8-year-old Jessica and 6-year-old Catherine, were eager to have some fun on the Wild Wonder. However, Catherine was too small to meet the ride's height requirements. This safety precaution would spare the girl from the horrific fate about to befall her mother and sister. As the teddy bear-shaped car carrying the two began its ascent, something went terribly wrong. Without warning, the car lost traction and began plummeting backward. It hurtled down the track it had just climbed, gathering speed as it fell 30 feet. At the base of the ascent, it encountered a sharp 90-degree curve, a turn never designed to be taken at such high speeds, let alone in reverse. The centrifugal force proved too much for the coaster's lap bar, and in a horrifying instant, both Kimberly and Jessica were violently flung from the car. But the chaos didn't end there. The car continued its uncontrolled journey, crashing into a line of waiting cars and injuring 2 additional riders. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but it was already too late for Kimberly and Jessica. They were pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. In the wake of the tragedy, state investigators launched an intensive 5-month probe. As they peeled back the layers of the roller coaster's operations, a disturbing picture of mechanical failures and design flaws began to emerge. At the heart of the disaster were 2 critical issues. Firstly, the car carrying the Baileys slipped back because an arm under it, designed to catch the chain that pulls the ride up the incline, was too worn to engage properly. Instead of continuing its climb, the car was left to roll back down the hill. Under normal conditions, an anti-rollback brake would have prevented the car from slipping back, but that night, the brakes failed to engage. Standard anti-rollback devices work by locking into saw teeth on the track, preventing the car from moving backward. It's the typical clacking sound when going up the lift hill. But investigators discovered that the system had been modified at the park's request. They deemed it too noisy for nearby residents. Zamperla then designed a jaw mechanism to bite down on the track to prevent rollbacks, replacing the typical ratchet and catch system. However, the teeth on these brakes deteriorated quickly after the ride opened in July. On August 17th, just 11 days before the accident, ride operators unscrewed the original brake assembly from each of the coaster's 4 cars and welded on new ones that had been fabricated at a local machine shop. But they were not made of hardened steel and wore down quickly. On the night of the accident, the teeth were too ground down to prevent the rollback. On top of that, the brakes relied on springs pressing them against the rail. But the installed springs were too weak to produce the needed pressure. Additionally, the parts that were supposed to grip the track weren't lined up correctly. The last state inspection of the ride was in July, before these changes were made. The modifications not only failed to conform to the manufacturer's standards, but had also been implemented without the required state approval. And if that wasn't enough, the incident also exposed inherent design flaws in the coaster construction. The safety lap bar, while effective for forward motion, proved useless against the forces of backward movement. Moreover, the car's open side, intended for ease of entry, became a deadly exit point when the ride reversed direction unexpectedly. There was one more chilling discovery made by the investigators. Less than an hour before the tragedy, another mother and daughter were riding the coaster when their car moved erratically, jolting forward and backward multiple times. The mother suffered severe shoulder and neck strains, while her daughter sustained a minor injury to her head. The 2 informed park officials about the problem, urging them to halt the coaster completely. The ride was temporarily shut down and inspected, but operators found no apparent problems and reopened it. By law, the only obligation the park had was to report the injury, which required first aid. The ride would only need to be shut down if the injuries resulted in hospital transport via ambulance. This incident revealed the significant gaps in the state's safety regulations, also known as the roller coaster loophole. It refers to the lack of federal oversight for fixed-site amusement park rides, which are those that remain permanently in one location. This gap came about in 1981 when the Consumer Product Safety Commission lost its authority to regulate these rides after pushbacks from the amusement park industry. So, what has changed since then? In response, New Jersey lawmakers proposed sweeping changes to the state's amusement ride safety regulations. Both the park owner and ride manufacturer had been fined the maximum allowed by law. Gillian's Wonderland Pier was fined $25,000 for 5 violations of ride codes and standards, while Zamperla received a $30,000 fine for 6 violations. The fines were the maximum allowed by law and the largest fine for an individual ride at that time. In response, one of the most crucial changes was a proposed 10-fold increase in the maximum fines for safety violations from $5,000 to $50,000 per violation. The proposed changes didn't stop at increased fines. State investigators also gained subpoena power, allowing them to demand testimony and documents during safety investigations. And ride manufacturers now had to provide detailed engineering designs and report accidents involving the same ride in other states. Investigators revealed a lack of uniform standards, inadequate safety measures, and insufficient regulatory authority across different states. Permanent rides at major theme parks fall under state jurisdiction, leading to a variety of safety standards. Some states, such as California and Texas, have strict safety programs, while 8 states lack any oversight agencies. Notably, large parks in Florida, like Disney World, are exempt from government checks. Most states require annual ride inspections, but only 10 mandate inspections each time a portable ride is set up. This means a carnival ride may not be checked since the last fair. Operator requirements also vary. Only 9 states require ride operators to be at least 18 years old, allowing high school students to operate rides in others. Furthermore, 36 states require parks to report serious injuries or deaths, but only 17 require reports on ride malfunctions. This lack of uniformity can make it challenging for safety advocates and researchers to identify trends and push for improvements within the industry. The tragic events of August 1999 serve as a grim reminder that with great excitement comes great responsibility. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.